again, Bright City. How we doing? Good morning. How's everyone doing? Very good seeing you guys. Well, hey, as Alex had mentioned just a minute ago, today we are celebrating our third year as being Bright City, guys, and that's something to celebrate. If you know the story of Bright City and how it came about, whether through going to First Step with seeing Pastor Sharon, or just really again being able to hear Pastor Sharon and Pastor Ike's heart for Bright City, one thing you learn is that God is faithful. In the midst of a pandemic, guys, God is faithful, and we're so happy that you guys are with us this morning. For those who don't know me, my name is Eric Davis. I'm one of the servant leaders here, and again, it's a pleasure and honor for you to be here. If this is your home, welcome. If you're checking us out, maybe you're dating Bright City, or if this is your first time, again, welcome. We want to get you connected. We want to get you involved, and there's a few ways in which we can do that. You can go ahead and text Bright City, all one word, to 94000, or you can fill out the connection card that's in front of you. And on that connection card, we're just looking for some information. And on the back, if you're looking for a prayer request, or you're looking for more information, if you're looking to serve, again, we want to get you connected here at Bright City. We want you to be a part of the family here. You can also do a couple more things as far as getting involved, and I want to share three things with you. One would be connect, when we talk about small groups. Another is serving, and another one is also giving. I'll start with connecting. We have actually launching some small groups coming next week, and so we're going to have the small group leaders here. They're going to be in person, they're going to be around the theater, and there's going to be a really good chance to get connected with a small group. Being here on Sundays is great. It is. It's truly awesome that we're able to celebrate Jesus here on Sundays together as a community. But it's also great to be able to have fellowship and connect with others throughout the week as well. And so with these small groups launching, it's a great way to get connected in that way. Serving is another thing which we call here. We really encourage as far as serving, we talk about Jesus and him serving and him loving his people. And we're called on mission to serve here at Bright City Church. And there's a few things that I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, and there's something I want to do a little bit different. After service, I know some folks are going to lunch at Old Mill Farm. I encourage everyone to go if you RSVP'd. If you didn't, I'm sure we'll have enough food there, right? We'll have enough food there. But I really want to hear your heart, okay? And maybe you've had some reservations about serving. Maybe you've had some hardship. Maybe you've had some burnout in the past. Maybe you really had a bad experience as far as serving and what that looks like at a previous church home. What I want to do after service is I'm going to be out in the lobby. I'm in this shirt. You probably can't miss me. But I would love to hear your heart. I would love to hear what that pain is inside. What is that angst that you're feeling? I want to hear your heart, and I really just want to be able to affirm you, to encourage you, to really step out in faith and to love you right where you are and saying, hey, here at Bright City, we encourage you, we love you, we want you to be a part of this and what we're doing here. So again, if you have a moment, come see me. Again, I'd love to serve you in that manner. Lastly, another way to get involved here at Bright City is by giving. We give because we can partner with Jesus and be on mission with him. And how we do that is through our vision here at Bright City. Being restored to God, being restored to ourselves, being restored to others by faith in the love of what Jesus has done for us in our lives, guys. That is powerful, to be able to be in the business, if you want to call it that, watching people's lives renewed, being able to step out in faith and just walk in this newness of life and watching people restored. It's amazing. It's beautiful. And by giving, we can partner with Jesus in that. There's a couple ways in which you can give. There should be a number behind me, or if you're watching online, there should be a number on the screen. But you can also go to Bright City, brightcitychurch.com/give. You can also give that way. Okay, so connect, serve, and give. Those are three ways in which you can get involved here, and we'd love to see you take part in that. Well, without further ado, I'm going to invite Pastor Sharon and Pastor Ike here, and we'll go from there. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Well, good morning, Bright City family. It is so good to be with you all this morning and celebrating our third anniversary. I I was thinking back to, this time 3 years ago and just praying, like, will we make it to 3 years? And then last year, the pandemic hits, and it's like, will we make it to 3 years?
Yeah.
But God has been so good.
But yeah, we're so excited to celebrate today. And Eric mentioned this, but one of the ways we'll be celebrating this morning is immediately after the service, we will be going down to Old Mill Farm for lunch. We will also have face painting. Our face painter is legit. I'm telling you, she's amazing. So if you've got kids or if you're an adult and you would like your face painted, there's no shame in that game. You are welcome to get your face painted. But we will be at Old Mill Farm. If you're brand new and this is your first time and you did not RSVP, you are still welcome. We are serving Chipotle burritos, which who can say no to Chipotle? Right. So you definitely can.
I cannot.
You cannot.
No.
So, but just Google in your GPS, just Old Mill Farm. You go down 751. It's like a few miles on your right. We will be there. We would love to have you, even if you are brand new. But this morning, we are going to be doing something a little bit different. This is actually what we did last year for our anniversary, and we think we want to make this kind of a tradition, is actually hearing from people in our church. And the reason why we want to do this as a tradition is that when we first received this call to launch Bright City, one of the questions that we received pretty frequently was why? Like, why plant a church? Why does this area specifically need another church? Especially, we are in the Bible Belt. Why do we need another church? And our answer to that question was, you'll have to take that up with God, because it really was not our idea. If you've been around, you have heard the story, but this wasn't something that we had always dreamed of doing, but it was something where God had given us a vision for a church. And so we started Bright City out of an act of obedience, honestly. It's really as simple as that. And so it wasn't that we had this vision for what Bright City was going to be. We were just following God's vision. Yeah. Now, over the years, we have learned more what God's vision was, but one of the things that has been really, really beautiful over the years is discovering that when God gave us that vision, he had many of you in mind. He had your names and your stories in mind. And so what we wanted to do this morning is for you to hear from some of those names that God had in mind. And if you've been serving here, this is an opportunity for you to see the fruit of, all the work you have been doing. You have tilled, the soil, you have planted, you have watered to make this a home for people, a refuge for people, a place where people could encounter Jesus and feel safe, which is actually a surprising need that we didn't even realize. So you're going to hear a lot of those stories. And if you are brand new, this is a little bit different, but this will actually give you a really great taste of our culture as a church. Yeah. So we're going to be hearing from 4 different couples and individuals this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and invite up, kicking off, Mark and Julie Ellen. So let's give them a round of applause. Mark and Julie Ellen have been with us for probably about 6 months now. And so I'm going to let y'all
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. We're Mark and Julie Ellen Simpson-Voss. We are new here. Still feel like we're getting to know a lot of you, but it's great to be here. Who doesn't love a birthday party, right? Woo! So I'm sure that everybody in the room pretty much would agree that moving is really, really hard. Moving, changing, especially when you're leaving a place you call home. So it doesn't really matter whether you're moving from an old city where you've lived to a new life in Durham, or maybe you're moving from a small apartment to a bigger place, or maybe some of you are like me, you're moving back into your office after having spent 18 months in your jogging pants, going to Zoom meetings. It doesn't really matter what that transition is. It's hard when you've kind of been in a place for a good long time. So we think about our couple story, and we talk a lot about our first big move when we left our home and came here. So this was about 30 years ago. We packed up a little Mazda hatchback, and we drove with all of our worldly possessions from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They fit in a hatchback. We were newlyweds. We did not have very much. And we knew not a soul in Chapel Hill. We really were completely new to the area. In fact, this was last century. So we navigated with this paper folded thing you called a map. And we found the apartment that we lived in Carborough. We'd never seen it before. We found it through a newspaper listing. They sent us the Durham Herald-Sun in the mail with stamps. And so this is how we arrived. We really were completely in an unusual place. And we love telling that story now because we look back on it and we realize that moment, that time of unfamiliarity, as hard as it was, really helped us become who we were as a couple. And I'm also convinced that the reason we remember so much of it so vividly, I mean, we can tell you like places we stopped along the way on the drive and where we got our first bank account. We remember all that stuff specifically because it was really, really hard. So in the summer of 2020, we started to confront the experience of needing to leave home again. But this time, the home was the church where we had spent most of the last 20 years as members. This was a church where we had been blessed enormously as a couple. We had grown spiritually. It's the church that we first visited when Julie Ellen was pregnant with our daughter. Our daughter just started college. So it gives you a sense of that life cycle that we were in. I mean, this was a place where we really felt at home. And it felt like the experience that I describe is like the experience in the Bible, and there are loads of stories where God clearly says to somebody, it's time for you to move. I've got a plan for you. I've got a place for you. You need to trust me and just go. I was reading the passage in Genesis 12 where Abram moves from Ur toward Canaan. The thing that they don't talk about there is how hard that must have been. It makes it sound like it was a piece of cake, but Abram moved. And we were feeling that same sense that God was really telling us it was time. And what we realized is that he was telling us it was time to leave the comfort of what we had known as church. And he was challenging us to leave a place where we were pretty comfortable worshiping with people who looked a lot like us, and that we were in really safe, kind of easy relationships with, because we really felt clearly God was calling us to confront the sin of racism in the church and in the world. And that he was calling us to be actively involved in a ministry of racial reconciliation. And we really wanted that door to be open in the church that we were, but we found that God was not opening that door. And so we had to really think about what it meant to be faithful and to leave home and find a new place.
So you would think that looking for a new home, a church home, during a pandemic would be hard, but God led us miraculously in a very simple way to Bright City Church, and it's called the intranet. So one of the first things we found when we were looking into Bright City Online was a series of social media posts recognizing the significance of Black History Month as an opportunity to recognize the need for racial reconciliation in the church. The incredible blessing of the last 6 months is that God has signaled to us that we belong at Bright City just as clearly as he was guiding us to move in the first place. Several years ago, I attended a Christian conference on racial reconciliation, and early in that conference, the facilitator exhorted us by saying that we as a society continue to fail at racial reconciliation because believers have not understood it and embraced it as a kingdom mandate. And as we've heard Ike and Sharon preach, and as Derwin Gray explains in his book, The Multi-Ethnic Church, there are several copies of it out in the lobby if you're interested in reading it, it is God's desire for us to be unified in him. And yet Christians too often fail to heed that call and lead our communities in lament and in courageous reconciliation and restoration. And I was so struck by that facilitator's statement, and it crystallized why I had continuously struggled to find the right place for the work of racial healing. I was searching for opportunities in my work, in volunteer opportunities, in books, in politics, when I should have been searching in the church. And the heavy weight and sadness that followed was in recognizing that the speaker was right. I could not see evidence in the church, really any church, that was taking up this gospel mandate. But that weight and that sadness has been replaced by hope as we see God's plan for unity come to life here at Bright City Church. Mark and I have spent months in the monthly prayer sessions, and then last week we've also participated in our first Be the Bridge session with 13 other members of this congregation. And being part of a church that is committed to courageous conversations, community building, prayer, discipleship, and sanctification, it's like healing waters. We are ready to dive in. and we are so grateful to God and to the Bright City community for heeding that call. We have felt immediately welcomed, encouraged, prayed over, and accompanied in the ministry God is calling us to pursue. And we give God all the glory because we know He is the only way we could feel so fully at home in a place where we are actually so new. We're going to remember this move not because of how hard it was or is, but because it has reinforced how good and loving God's guidance is. So thanks and praise to Him, and amen.
Thank you. You know, as I was listening to them share about God just calling them to leave their home and come, I realized that this was in many ways an answer to a prayer that we have and that we continue to pray. Young churches, one of the demographics that they tend to lack is empty nesters, because empty nesters tend to already be rooted in churches. And so that is one need that we have had is an older generation who has that wisdom of lived experience and that spiritual maturity. And it's something that we have been praying for. And so we're so grateful that you guys listened to the Holy Spirit and came when He called you. And I would also add for all of you and anyone who's watching this online, please continue to pray for that. We really need that older generation commissioned and sent and to be on the front lines, because church plants really are kind of on the front lines of reaching people. So thank you, Mark and Julie Ellen. Next, we have Matt and Maria, who are going to come up here. Matt, you might have noticed, was shredding it on the guitar. And then Maria, she leads kind of behind the scenes a little bit. We have an advisory council. We don't have elders yet because we are a young church, but we do have an advisory council that sort of functions in that capacity. And Maria is part of that, speaking wisdom into a lot of the decisions that we make in our church. And so we are really grateful to have you and to hear from you this morning.
Hey, everyone. How's everyone doing? All right, so as Sharon mentioned, my name is Matt Tackett, and this is my wife, Maria Tackett. And we actually moved to Durham in 2018 from Richmond, Virginia. And we spent about a year living downtown Durham and looking for different churches, trying those out in the downtown area in our new city. About a year later, we moved to South Durham and decided to give Bright City a try, since we hadn't really found anything that we stuck with in the downtown area. And this was about a few weeks before the church's 1-year anniversary. Ike was preaching a sermon on Mark 4, the parable of the sower. And we'd heard this passage, sermons on this passage several times in the past. However, this sermon was different for us. It struck us in the way that the sermon revealed new insights that we hadn't noticed in the text before, and it helped us understand it in a completely new way. We were also really impressed by the incredibly welcoming environment and how comfortable we felt. It was almost as if we had already been members of this community. Another thing that stuck out is that on our first Sunday, we talked with Sharon quite a bit, and she invited us to her and Ike's home for a young married couple's hangout. And this was actually the first time we had been invited to the pastor's house before even going to a second service. So that was pretty cool. So we didn't know it at the time, but at that event, several people at the event actually would become our members of our small group at Bright City, and they'd become some of our closest friends in Durham. After that first Sunday, we found ourselves being drawn back to Bright City week after week. From the moving worship, thoughtful teaching, and welcoming environment on Sunday mornings, to other conversations we had with people at the church, we knew that God was doing something special here, and we wanted to be a part of it.
So surprisingly, it was in spring 2020, after everything shut down and moved online, that we really solidified our community at Bright City. This was when we started our small group, who is basically a group of people who were meeting on Zoom, looking for connection as we all stayed in our homes and social distancing. we went through the Rooted study, and within a few weeks, our group was already having these really rich and in-depth conversations as we openly shared our thoughts and experiences and curiosities. And together, we really grappled with, what it looked like. Can you hold this, please? There we go. Cool. Thank you. What it really looked like to, follow Christ through a pandemic and through racial and political tension, and all of this on top of just the regular everyday questions like how to rest and what does it look like to actually take a Sabbath. And so, since then, over the past year or so, our small group has truly become our family, and I like to call them our people. And it's just been really special and life-giving to be part of this community where we can seamlessly jump from, these deep theological discussions to just crying, laughing over the most random things and back again. And, as each new person joins our small group, it really just feels like reuniting with old friends. And at the same time, being in this small group and being part of this community has really helped us deepen our relationship with God as we've learned how to connect with Him in new ways and sort of rethink how we're spending time with Him reading Scripture and praying, and just being encouraged to be really intentional about making these very consistent and intentional parts of our daily rhythms. And so as we were putting this together, we were trying to figure out how do we sum up just what is it about Bright City that makes it so special to us, in addition to the things that we've mentioned so far. And we had some friends visit last weekend from out of town, and they were sharing their experience looking for a church and sort of what would their struggles because they hadn't landed on one yet. And, my friend said she's in HR, so she's really good at sort of putting things in points. And she said, there's sort of three things they were really looking for. And it was good teaching, strong community and discipleship, and a church that had a heart for diversity and racial reconciliation. And they felt after searching that they would have to just kind of give up on at least one of those things because they didn't think a place existed where they could find all three. And so as we were, kind of reflecting on that conversation, we realized that this was actually a good summation of what kept drawing us back to Bright City in 2019 and why it's our church home now. Because this is a place where we actually haven't had to give up any one of those three. Through this church, God has created a place where good teaching, strong community and discipleship, and a true heart for diversity and racial reconciliation, which Mark and Julie Ellen put so beautifully earlier, those can all coexist, and in fact, not just merely coexist, but shine through each and every aspect of this church. And so we're really excited to celebrate 3 years with Bright City, and we look forward to many more anniversaries to come.
Thank you, guys. Another thing that is really interesting listening to these first two stories and how they both mentioned racial reconciliation. And one of the things that it really struck me hearing that is that, again, when we got the vision for this church, we didn't have anything specific in mind other than being faithful to God and sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. And one thing that we are really clear on here is that the gospel is not individualistic. It's not just a box that you check so that you can go to heaven, but that the good news of Jesus Christ is that God is restoring all things. And so we talk about that. That's a part of our mission. It's on our website that the gospel, it restores us to God. It also restores us to one another, and it restores the self. And so as we, in this past year, it became evident that there was a huge wound in the church and that the gospel is not neutral about that Jesus is not neutral about that. And so just walking out that conviction, it naturally made our church into this beacon where we didn't realize people wanted to be discipled through this specifically. And so that has been something really amazing that, again, God had planned for our church that we didn't even know at the time. And it's been really amazing to see the fruit of that. So next we have, by the way, we have a non-COVID cold running through our family. If I sound really hoarse, that is why. Every time I was just traveling yesterday, every time I coughed, I did feel like a social pariah. And so if you hear me up here and you're like, I feel very unsafe right now, please know that we've been tested and it's all negative. It's just like a run-of-the-mill cold. So anyway, Sydney and Stephen, speaking of which, I'm still going to keep my distance because they're both in the medical field. But Sydney and Stephen have been here. I know, it's stay away. Sydney and Steven have been with us for about a year now, and we just love them to pieces. And they have such a spirit of hospitality and have really become, in a relatively short period of time, kind of the relational glue. Sydney specifically, I don't think you realize how often your name comes up in conversations with people and just how much you mean to people in our church. And so I'm really excited for our people to hear from you guys this morning.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Those are really kind words. Agreed. I would, I think Sydney needs to be blown up a little bit. Yeah. Anyways, like Sharon was saying, my name's Steven. This is my wife, Sydney. We have a little 3-year-old running around. Her name's Charlie. We had planned for her to be up here so we could do this as a family, but plug for Kid City. Yeah. Yeah, any opportunity to offload a little responsibility. We feel blessed to be up here. We feel honored to be with you guys. And I think now we feel really excited to be living in North Carolina. I say that with a little hesitation because we haven't always felt that way about North Carolina, to be clear, not Bright City, North Carolina. About a year and a half ago, we got the news that we'd be moving to Chapel Hill, Durham area. A little surprising at the time. We were not 100% expecting it. We knew it was a possibility, but we kind of felt voluntold, so to speak, by the Holy Spirit. And so we packed up and we moved. And like I said, we were excited, but we were also a little devastated. To offer a little bit of context, we had lived for 8 years with a group of people, a group of like-minded believers that were just strong followers of Jesus. They were genuine souls, and they loved Jesus. To just be as straightforward as possible, they were good people. So it hurt, honestly, to pick up and move. And for the next 6 months to a year, we felt pretty lost. We felt desperate for the life that we had, for the easy ways that we were able to see Jesus' love shine through that group of people. And it was good. And so we missed that. We missed that a lot and felt pretty hurt, I think me in particular, by the Holy Spirit. I started to ask question things that I think I would have preached to other people and preached with a conviction about those things. But all of a sudden I was asking questions. I think the one that most clearly comes, that I recall most clearly, is just, Lord, is this what it means to be in the world and not of it? That I either have to live with that community that was way more comfortable with, that had become a sort of family to us, or that I have to live all alone. Like it was like a one-time, like a one-shot thing. And I was frustrated. But then we had a friend from that same group. She told us to check out Bright City. If I remember correctly, she said, looks like a bunch of good, genuine people that love Jesus. And so I was like, hey, we know people like that. And so we came to the farm for our first church service, and nothing could feel more welcoming. I didn't mention this earlier, but we're from Mississippi. But nothing could have felt more welcoming to us than having service on a farm. So we were in. It was awesome. And then we got plugged into our small group. They're up there. I'm going to shout out to y'all. What's up? And that was amazing, too. I would drop names, y'all, but I'd be up here all afternoon because y'all are so amazing, so special, just good, genuine people that love Jesus. We started to see things change really quick, though, all that to say. So much so that we were asking questions again. Questions like, Lord, is this actually what you mean when you say we're called to be in the world but not of it? That we can live in Jackson, Mississippi, or we can live in Chapel Hill, Durham, North Carolina, and the kingdom is present all the same, and that joy shines through all the same. So all that to say, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for allowing us to be a part of your family and walk out the kingdom here with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right, so last but not least, we have Jenna McClear. And Jenna is one of our originals. She has been with us actually since before we launched. At our previous church, Ike was a pastor of college and young adults. And so Jenna was one of our students. And you were actually saying earlier that you've known Jenna since middle school, which I don't think I realized. Very briefly. You met her then? Yeah. So we've known Jenna for a long time, and so I'm excited for you to hear her story. And one of the reasons why I'm excited for you to hear her story is with her leading worship. I think when we look at worship leaders and they're up on stage and they're smiling and they're jumping and they're so full of joy, it's easy to feel like their life must be different than mine, that they must be experiencing God in a way that is different from me. They seem so sure of God. They seem so certain of truth. And so I'm excited for Jenna to share just a little bit about her story so that you can know that the people on our worship team are singing the gospel because they've experienced it. They've experienced it. So welcome, Jenna.
Thank you. Thank you. I said this during team service, but I would much rather sing into a microphone than to stand up here and talk about my feelings. So I'm just going to read straight from here, if that's okay with y'all. 3 years ago, when we were planting Bright City, I was starting my junior year of college as a recently transferred Carolina student. I had known Ike and Sharon for a long time, so when I heard they were going to plant a church in Durham at the same time that I was transferring to Chapel Hill, going to their church was the logical conclusion. It almost felt like another decision off of my plate. I wasn't going to have to look for a church to call home because I already had one waiting for me. However, even though going to Bright City was a decision that made the most sense, somehow I knew that God was up to something really special here. I will never forget a conversation I had with Sharon in those first few months. One Sunday, she looked at me and said, "You're always here." I looked at her confused and said, "Well, yeah." At the time, it didn't occur to me that it was out of the ordinary for a 20-year-old college junior to be setting up a church plant every Sunday at 7 a.m. She said, "I feel like sometimes you miss other stuff just to be here. Why do you do that?" At the time, I honestly didn't know the answer to her question, but looking back now, I believe I know why. I was always here because of God's vision for Bright City and his vision for my life. Something we often say around here is that we are thoughtful about faith and passionate about Jesus. We want people to give their whole selves to God, intellectually and emotionally. For me, I never had an issue giving myself to God intellectually. Somehow, the existence and love of God always made sense to me. However, from an emotional perspective, my faith was very fragile. I have always had trouble being honest with myself, God, and others about my emotions. It is much easier to present myself as carefree and happy-go-lucky than to admit I care about anything deeply, even in a positive sense. In 2018, I rededicated my life to Christ. I learned for the first time that Jesus loves me, not just in a logical, God loves everyone type of way, but in a uniquely personal way. I learned that Jesus deeply cares about my fears, my feelings, and the burdens I was carrying. What I didn't know was that Jesus created the church to care about me in the exact same way. And I especially didn't know that just a few short months later, God was going to use Bright City to show me that. Those first few Sundays, I put on my carefree face and skipped into church with a smile. I was in my comfort zone. If the people at Bright City thought I was nice, funny, and outgoing, they couldn't get too close to know who I actually was. The only problem was God didn't create me to be just nice, funny, and outgoing. However, I wasn't comfortable with identifying as anything more real than those surface-level personality traits, because underneath the nice, funny, outgoing Jenna, I sincerely believed that I was intense, chaotic, and obnoxious. I work in the mental health field, and one of the things you learn while working in mental health is that our brains are wired to recognize and latch on to patterns. In a basic sense, if you are told something often enough, even if it is a lie, you will begin to believe it. In almost every area of my life growing up, the same messages were repeated to me over and over again. I was told that I was too loud, too confrontational, too opinionated, and an embarrassment to those around me. It felt like I was always being scrutinized and I could never do anything right. As much as I hate to admit it, I have carried these beliefs with me, and they continue to affect the way I act, think, and feel today. Because of these beliefs, by default, it is very hard for me to let anyone truly care about me. But God gave me a place to heal these beliefs and let others truly care for me. God gave me Bright City. After those first few months of shallow pleasantries, God slowly started putting people from Bright City in my path to affirm good fruit in me. Instead of calling me intense, the people of Bright City called me passionate. Instead of calling me chaotic, the people of Bright City praised my energy and zeal for life. Instead of calling me obnoxious, the people of Bright City called me joyful. I remember in that first year when everyone started to speak things over me, my entire body would tense up as if I was warding off an attack. It felt dangerous to believe that any of those things were true about me. It felt much safer to continue to believe that I was worthless to others than to let anyone care about me. And it didn't stop there. Not only was I affirmed verbally, I was also encouraged tangibly. One of the clearest examples of this encouragement is my journey into leading worship. Not many of you know this, but prior to 2019, I hadn't performed a note in my life. My singing was reserved solely for the ears of my car's radio. But one day, God told me to lead worship. And without missing a beat, Bright City became a place to step into a crazy calling that made zero sense at the time. And the people of this church never once ceased in their encouragement. For maybe the first time in my life, instead of being told to stay in my place and to not ruffle feathers, I was told to go wherever God was leading me. As the years have gone by, I've been given the opportunity to take positions of leadership I never believed I was capable of, and with shaking hands, I was encouraged every step of the way. The people of this church never stopped believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Our brains are trained to learn patterns. The patterns my brain learned for most of my life were cruel lies that I continue to battle every day. But for the last 3 years, new patterns have been forming. Jesus has been using this church as a place of healing in my heart, a place of truth for my brain, and a place of rest for my soul. God has used Bright City to show me that it is safe to let my walls down and be myself. God has used Bright City to show me that who I truly am is joyful, enthusiastic, passionate, and brave. God has used Bright City to show me that it is safe to be cared for. Those words, joyful, enthusiastic, passionate, and brave, are direct quotes from the people at this church. I am still very much in the trenches when it comes to healing and recovery these days, but I can without a doubt say that on the days where I believe the worst of me, Bright City believes the best. I am so thankful that I walked in these theater doors 3 years ago, and I thank God that we are still here today. I cannot wait to watch God continue to use this church as a place of healing, and I praise him that some of that healing started with me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you all for sharing these stories of just what God has done in your lives and just things that we never would have imagined when we planted. I want to share as we get ready to wrap up, and I want to invite the band to come on back up. But I wanted to share, when we started this idea, when we first felt this call to plant, I took out this notebook and just started making notes. I called it cleverly the launch pad. Not cheesy at all. Somebody told me recently that they call me dad jokes because of my sermons. I didn't realize I told that many dad jokes, but apparently I do. But I started taking notes in here. I started making all kinds of lists, and one of the lists that I made was things that I feared, fears that I had, reasons I didn't think that I could do it or that we could do it. And some of them were legitimate fears, fears like I'm never going to see my kids and my wife because I'm going to be so busy planting this church. And even when I do see them, I'm going to be so terrible to be around that it won't be fun for anyone. So some serious fears, but then I had some kind of ridiculous fears, like the name was going to be stupid. The name of the church was going to be stupid. But I wasn't going to realize it until after we launched, and so at that point you can't change it. It was a fear that I had, and so I made all these notes in here. I had written down confirmation that we had received, affirmation, conversations that just said, this is what you're supposed to do. But then I turned to a page that said mission, vision, and purpose. And on that page, I take some time to reflect on a verse that really inspired the name for us and was important for us in terms of vision and direction as a church, but that we haven't talked about a lot, which is Matthew 5:14. And so I want to take a moment just to share what I wrote about this verse, because I think it's really important as we think about where we're going as a church. Matthew 5:14 says this, it says, "You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden." Now, this is a verse that if you grew up in church, you're probably familiar with, you've heard 1,000 times. But what struck me about this verse, as I thought about the name of our church, another way of saying what Jesus was saying here is a bright city cannot be hidden. A bright city cannot be hidden. Several years ago, this was before I was married, before Sharon and I were married, me and a group of friends were hanging out one weekend, and my buddy had been talking to his girlfriend on the phone, and got off the phone with her, and we went into this conversation, and he said some things after that probably shouldn't have been said, and what he didn't know is that he had butt-dialed his girlfriend back. And she had heard all of this. And so he calls her back, and at this point, she's like, yeah, we're done. This is over. The relationship's over. And I said, look, man, she was living in New York City at the time. I said, look, man, I will drive with you there tonight. We will go tonight. So we got in the car and made the drive, and about 4 o'clock in the morning, we are starting to seeing in the distance this bright light coming over the horizon. And it's 4 a.m., so we're like, it's not the sun. It can't be the sun coming up. And as we got closer, we realized it was New York City. This bright city was shining over the horizon. It was shining this undeniable light, this unmistakable light. And when Jesus talks about the church being a city on a hill, being a bright city that can't be hidden, he's calling us as the church to be an unmistakable light, an undeniable light, a light that cannot be hidden. And what I wrote in this notebook that day was this desire for the church to be this unmistakable light, because light changes things. Light changes us, more importantly. It changes how we see ourselves. It changes how we see those around us. It changes how we see what God is up to in the world. And I wrote that I wanted Bright City to be a people who are powerfully transforming our city, a church desperate to realize God's desires for all of creation that's rooted right here in the RDU area, that we are to be a bright city that cannot be hidden. Jesus says, you are the light of the world. And he's calling us, not just individually, but as a community of people, to be a bright city that cannot be hidden. He's calling us not to just be kind of this dim light in the world, this night light of the world, but he's calling us to be the gorgeous, glaring, God-glorifying light of the world, a bright city that cannot be hidden. And this morning, that's what I want us to begin thinking through, is what does it look like for us to be a church that its reputation is we are here for our city? That our city is brighter because we're here. That our city is being transformed because this church community is here. What does it look like for us to be known as a church that's not here for ourselves? That we just come together on Sunday for a worship service, but that we're here to be sent out into our communities to have the influence that God invited us to have. To be the bright city that our world looks to when it's lost, when it's dark, when it's without hope. We're going to sing a song this morning called Glorious Day. That's a really important song to us and to me personally. But it has this lyric in here. It says, I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. Then you called my name, and I came running out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Light changes us. And most importantly, the light of God changes us. And he wants to change us so that through us, he can change our city. May we be that bright city that cannot be hidden as a church for the life of this church. May that be our reputation.